The realization of equanimity, or the living of equanimity, can roughly be divided into two phases. One phase, which is exemplified by awakening, by Kensho, by that first shift in identity, is when we don't react because it's as if there's nothing to react to. The impetus to react, it just seems gone, or it's rare. But the underlying sense is that there's just nothing to react to. The underlying sense is everything is just okay as it is. Everything is fundamentally okay. And this experience of equanimity is such a beautiful experience. It's so profound and it's so surprising. As I've said before, it feels something like, for me it did, there was a weight I was carrying, that I had been carrying for years, almost as if I had a backpack on and someone had every once in a while added one more stone to the backpack, but I didn't even know I was wearing it. And over time, it just got heavier and heavier. Well, all of a sudden with that shift, I just had set it down. It felt like I didn't even have to set it down. It just wasn't there. The notable contrast between the weight and then the ease afterward was surprising and incredible. And it also had, and I would say has, because I find that most, if not everyone who goes through that type of shift has a similar experience. But it also has this quality of like, oh, of course it's like this. It's already like this. We can see beyond that first shift that we had been adding something to experience. So we had actually been adding those little stones to the backpack. I had been adding those stones to the backpack. I just didn't know I was doing it. You know, the backpack was made out of thought. The stones were made out of beliefs and judgments and fears, and really, and it was made out of reactivity to thought. So that's what I'm getting at here is the first recognition of equanimity is the recognition that we react to thought, and we don't have to. And we react to thought because we believe thought. So the first shift really hinges upon seeing that 99% of what we get ourselves up to, or we spend our energy and attention on, is thought. And that thought is like a set of apparitions, ghosts. There's just nothing important there. There's nothing real there. And when we see that, it's a huge relief, because what is then revealed is what was already here. The ease was already here. The simplicity was already here. The fluidity of life was already here. The sense of pure being that is not contingent upon any thought, belief, past or future, or anything, is just here, always, and couldn't not be. So this comes with a tremendous relief, and that's the equanimity of seeing we don't have to react to thoughts. Doesn't mean we'll never react to thoughts. In fact, after this kind of honeymoon period, after an awakening, we do find that we sometimes react to thoughts again, but not nearly to the degree we did, and we never really believe thoughts anymore. The reaction's more like a habit, right? Well, let me back up. It's not even that we never believe a thought. We might get caught in a thought here and there, but we fundamentally see that the thoughts are not what I am. They don't define me in any way at all. They don't define anything, right? They're thoughts. So that doesn't go away. That insight is there. And then after this sort of honeymoon phase, some reactivity starts to creep back in a little bit in thought, and occasionally sort of believing a thought for a moment, but it's very intermittent. We often drop back into that default relaxed openness, right? That equanimity of consciousness. I'll call this the equanimity of consciousness. That's the first type of equanimity. The second type of equanimity is a little more hard-earned. This is what you earn through doing the shadow work, especially the deep shadow work. This is what you earn through not finding the relative within the absolute, the initial awakening, but finding the absolute within the relative, and then thoroughly integrating those. And you thoroughly integrate them by finding yourself in challenging situations, right? Challenging conditions. And then we realize what we're really reacting to, what we were reacting to the whole time. What we were reacting to such that we had to construct an artificial consciousness-based sense of I, self, and then move into it, and then get all entangled in thoughts and react to thoughts, which hopefully largely stopped happening after awakening. But now we see why that was even there in the first place. And it's because we're reacting to sensations. We're reacting to conditions, let's say, or the conditions that trigger sensations in the body. And this can be surprising how much reactivity is here, how much reactivity is left. So if this sounds confusing, the distinction I'll make is with that first type of equanimity, the equanimity of consciousness, what we find often is with practice, we can return to that equanimity pretty simply, pretty easily when we're on the mat, when we're meditating, when we're just sitting in peace, when we're on a silent retreat. And then other times it happens spontaneously and sometimes through practice, but it's inconsistent. It feels somewhat practice-based, or it feels inconsistent. It feels sometimes even random. Whereas when we start to investigate the nature of reactivity in regard to sensation, to body, not to mind, but to body, not to thought, but to form. When we start to investigate that, and there are different ways to do it. One good way is through the description Kevin Shanelick and I talked about called fourth and fifth fetter approach. That's a good way to get at gross reactivity or relational reactivity for sure. Doesn't get at all resistance, but as we start to do that, we see, oh, okay, I'm actually reacting to sensations. When we get beyond the illusions of physical duality, form, separation, and so forth, then we start to see that the only thing we could react to is sensation, and that there's sometimes a strong resistance to sensation. Feeling that resistance, recognizing it, and noticing associated thoughts, beliefs, and judgments will settle it with time more and more. But again, it can be surprising how much reactivity we can have at a sort of energetic level, at a formless level. Reaction to formlessness, let's say. The physical experience of just being alive in an energetic body is far more intense than we usually realize, certainly than we realize when we're mind identified, thought identified. There's this very interesting kind of, I don't know what I'd call it. It's like a false equanimity in consciousness in people who are mind identified. Some people who are clearly very mind identified, they can almost look calm. They can look like they have a sort of equanimity, and yet they also look detached, right? They look like they're in their head. They look like they're far behind their eyes. And they live in concepts. Like I've seen this in some politicians and different people, public figures, but this is all an illusion. They don't even realize how much reactivity they have buried in the body, and that's when you see that stuff come out in people that surprises you in stressful situations, fearful situations, when all of a sudden that pain body activates, and you're like, how could that happen? How can a person who seemingly had good intention suddenly do pretty rotten things, right? This is a bit of an aside, but it's just something I see in certain political settings and so forth. And I think this is exactly what it is, that they're run by unconsciousness, right? The ability of thought identification to numb you to the intensity of being alive and in a body and being human, and empathic drive and fear and emotion and shame and rage and all this can be numbed out incredibly, and it can leak out in strange ways and harm people and so forth. That's the dissociation between body and mind. But once we're, awake at the level of thought, which is awake to non-conceptuality, we have an opportunity to really get down under the hood and see what we're fundamentally reacting to. The kind of reactions that started forming a sense of separate self at a very young age. That sense of separate self is sort of wired into us, right? It seems like it's going to express for almost everyone, but it gets strongly reinforced by the intensity of reactivity to sensation. So that's the kind of second kind of reactivity, and that one is one that the approach to settling it, the approach to that type of equanimity is kind of opposite of the first. The first is, you can close the sense gates and just put your attention fully into consciousness, not grasping thoughts, but not avoiding thoughts, not pushing and pulling on thoughts. Again, not reacting to thoughts. If you do that long enough, it will hit you over the head. It will be clear. That awakening will crystallize, This one's different. This doesn't happen in a flash. It also requires you to do quite the opposite. It's actually to lean into life lean into the challenges, the grittiness, the textures of life, the confusion, the challenging situations with people, the relationship challenges, like just all of it. It requires you to lean into all of that in a gritty way, like moment to moment, moving from experience to experience, but doing so not letting go of what was realized in the first awakening and the equanimity of consciousness, but realizing that equanimity of consciousness now can be found in a myriad of experiences. It's just you have to be very open to it in a physical way. Yeah, you have to be willing to feel. Sometimes people will message me and say, this is happening, that's happening. And, it's emotion stuff they're talking about and reactivity and this and that. A lot of times I just say, and they say, what should I do? And I just say, feel. Just feel. Keep feeling, And notice the difference between feeling and analyzing what you're feeling, judging what you're feeling, labeling what you're feeling. Those, especially labeling, can be helpful at first, right? If you're completely just mind identified and you don't even know what the heck you're feeling, it can be helpful to go, oh, am I feeling, what emotion is it? Shame? Oh, that's shame, or guilt, or it can be helpful. But at some point, you got to feel so thoroughly that there's no feeler left. There's no one judging what's being felt. There's no one identifying what's being felt or thinking about it or conceptualizing it. So the work here is actually seeing, not that thoughts aren't really real or that they don't really define you in any way or time or the seeker or any of it. All that's illusory. It's all thought. It's not that. That's the first insight. The second insight, though, is seeing mechanistically how quickly those thoughts or the tendency to go into consciousness in a polarizing way happens in the face of certain sensations. It can be any sensation, right? It can be pain, it can be emotional sensations, it can be hot, cold, it can be joy. People react to all kinds of stuff. So that's the work here, is getting closer and closer to your experience in real time, day to day, moment to moment, situation to situation dynamics of life. And with an open heart, not forgetting the initial insight, but noticing that now it can apply itself, or can be found, that insight of equanimity and non-reactivity, non-attachment, non-aversion, can also be found in the sensations that occur, that appear in the myriad of situations and so forth, and even very triggering ones. They're previously very triggering ones. So many areas of my life, I've been surprised how in the past, even with a lot of clarity, I was pretty convinced that certain things just cause reaction. And now seeing that they just don't have to. Beliefs are strong. And we're seeing this now. Like, this is the stage of seeing, wow, a belief unseen. A thought unseen is a belief in a sense. But a belief unexamined feels like some kind of solid reality. It could feel like an energetic reality, but it feels very real. And that's where identity is rooted. This is the root of identity. This is the difference between seeing through the separate self, or the seeker, or the me. The difference between that and seeing through selfing, the tendency to self, the tendency to subjectify, the tendency to use some kind of inner world momentarily to avoid the intensity of sensation. That's what you're doing here. That's the work that's here. It's shadow work, deep shadow work. It's also insight work. It's also integration work. It's also the work of openness, and it's also the work of living with more and more attunement and congruence with the Dharma vehicle itself, which has freed you all along the way and continues to.